And welcome. This is the next lesson, a crochet cast on and loop through loop cast off. So let's get started. You're going to begin once again by selecting every other needle, one by one selection on your main bed. Again, making the sample size anywhere from 40 to 50 needles total is usually good for a swatch. Then you're going to take your scrap yarn and put it into your carriage. Set the tension dial a little bit looser tension and take your passage across. After this, insert the comb centered with the teeth pushing into the yarn's edge, making sure that you've grabbed it all the way across and the end of the yarn on the left side is coming in front of the comb teeth and back into your carriage. Then place a weight in the middle and you are ready to do the next passage back to the right side. At this point, you can now put all your needles back into work. And here we're going to do about 1 inch or 2 inches of scrap yarn to give the sample a good edge before crochet casting on. Don't worry too much about the raw edge. Usually sometimes on the left it will get stuck on the teeth, but again, this is scrapping yarn and it will not be part of your good final sample. So working about 1 inch or 2 of scrap here. What is important is that the scrap yarn, if you have an extra loop, it's not stuck on the actual machine because that could stop the weight from distributing evenly. When you're ready, remove the scrap yarn. And now we're going to learn the crochet cast on loop through loop. Before we do this, take a yarn that is nice and smooth. Usually it's a viscose or a cotton yarn. And we're going to insert 1 row of what's known as ravel cord. So that just separates the scrap from the good yarn. You'll see here I don't even have it going through the antenna. I'm just holding it 1 passage from right to left. And that's going to be the yarn that we pull to separate the scrap from the good sample. Put all your needles in D at this point. This is deselecting the needles. Push them forward. And on your carriage, you'll want to select the hold button. As you bring your carriage back to the right side, the needles will stay in non-working position. Now we can do the crochet cast on. Create a loop in one hand and using your latch tool, put the loop to the bottom of the latch tool, inserting in between the first and second needle. You're going to then feed the yarn through the first needle and behind the latch. Once again, we're going under, taking the yarn through the latch and creating a loop. Try not to pull too tight as we don't want the tension of these loops to be extremely tight against the machine. It will be hard to take your carriage across. So give it a little bit of space here and working from, usually we work from left to right towards the carriage. So for example, if your carriage was on the left side, you can do your loops from the right to the left to meet your carriage on the left. Here, as I've shown, we brought our carriage back to the right and we're going from left to right. So every loop goes behind the latch and then you take the yarn into the latch and create a loop. When you reach the end, your extra loop will go onto the final hook. So you'll have a doubling up here of 2 loops on the final hook's edge. Needles are still in D position. Take your good yarn and now you can place it back in your carriage. And make sure to remove the carriage from the hold position. So the carriage is in normal position, and your needles, you're just checking to see if your crochet cast on is pushed to the back of your needles, making sure it's not within any of the latch portion of the needles. And the needles can stay in D position because now in normal position on the carriage, they will take the needle back into B working position. Here you can see close up, it's a little bit of an eyelet view, the crochet cast on. Now you're ready to knit. Take your carriage, one passage across. You can keep the tension a little bit tighter for the first passage if you like. And thereafter, I would recommend you need to set your tension dial to the appropriate stockinette stitch that works with your yarn. Mine is a medium weight yarn here, for example, so I have my carriage around 7. And you can proceed here for as large as you'd like your swatch to be. We'll also be learning how to calculate swatch size, so the calculation, the number of passages will be predetermined. And knit the number of passages that you need to at this time. For your last row, leave the carriage to the left. At this point, you're going to change the dial to as large as you can, about double the normal tension, and take the carriage one passage across at a larger tension. This is the loop through loop or crochet cast off preparation. So you can see close up that the last loop is much larger than the stockinette standard tension. This is because we need some room to create the crochet cast off. Remove your yarn from the carriage and give yourself a length that is about 3 or 4 times as long before cutting the good yarn away and place it on your antenna for next use. So now with the latch tool again, you're going to take the loop into your latch tool, removing it from the machine and transferring it to the next loop. The first latch goes behind the latch tool and the loop goes through the previous loop. So again, the loop behind the latch tool, pick up your next loop and remove it from the machine and create one latch loop. We're moving from right to left this time. This is a crochet method. We're actually crocheting here. Every loop behind the latch, the loop through the previous loop, and continue on for the entire sample. Keeping in mind that it is sometimes pretty difficult, and if your loop is too little, it's going to be really hard to push it behind the latch and you may risk dropping the loop and things unraveling. So make sure that last passage is larger and that you've got space in order to loop the previous loop through the next one. Moving from one direction to the other slowly and carefully. When you reach the end of your sample, the final loop off the machine will leave you with a remaining loop. So you'll need to take the good yarn, a piece of it, and close off the end with a little knot. This piece we will then clean finish into the seam and you won't see it in your final sample. And there you go. Here's how the swatch looks with the ravel cord in between your scrap yarn and good yarn. For the ravel cord removal, simply grab it from one end and just give it a good pull. It should be, again, a slippery weighted yarn, so it should pull out fairly easily and separate your scrap yarn from your good swatch. You'll see the crochet cast on and the final cast off. Give it a good steam and you're left with two beautiful clean edges. And there you go. There's your crochet cast on and loop through loop cast off.